And joining us now is SBJ's resident football expert on the ground in New Orleans, eating as many beignets as I hope he can possibly get his hands on. Ben Fischer, thanks for joining the pod.
Hey, thanks for having me. Sorry, it's been tough to track me down. They got us running around a lot down here.
A lot going on in Super Bowl week. I wouldn't have expected that, but apparently it's a very busy week for our industry. They tell me. At least they tell me.
It is, but New Orleans isn't so bad. It's plenty of walking instead of cars, which I'll take.
Ben, I wanted to talk to you specifically about Roger Goodell's press conference earlier in the week and some of the media storylines that were coming out of that presser. You were on the ground for that. So first and foremost, Roger Goodell did talk about Tom Brady and how he kind of has regular discussions with him. Obviously, he's got the ownership side, he's got the analyst side. But what did you make of that constant interaction that apparently the two of them have?
Yeah, that was interesting. He mentioned that. Maybe just one of those little reminders that of how extraordinary the Tom Brady situation is in the first place, that anyone who is an announcer is talking to the commissioner directly on a regular basis. I think mostly the talent we've had on this podcast have said that sort of direct to the top conversation communication is pretty extraordinary. So just a little reminder about how strange this situation is. I thought that was really well received, presuming we take it at face value that is the nature of the conversations and that Tom Brady is sincerely concerned about this. I think that actually goes a long way to lowering temperatures around people who have been complaining about the conflict of interest or how it's been handled by Fox and or the Raiders and or the NFL, because it doesn't make it go away. But in my opinion, part of the story has been this feeling that fans are being gaslit a little bit. Gaslit, whatever it is. They feel like unfairly misled because there's this tone from the NFL and to a certain extent Fox. How could you possibly suggest anything untoward is going on? There's nothing wrong with this. Everything's fine. You're a conspiracy theorist if you think he's gaining any sort of advantage. Don't ask too many follow-up questions about the rather extensive work we put into policies specifically addressing this circumstance. So I think the mere fact that Roger Goodell and apparently Tom Brady recognizes this is a real issue and that it's worth some degree of conversation to make sure it's not getting worse. Does it fix everything? No, but I think it's well received by fans who are like, okay, at least they recognize that this is a thing.
Yeah, I will say in Fox's media call yesterday, the question several journalists did ask about potential conflict of interest and if he's suffering as a broadcaster from not being allowed in these production meetings because of his ownership. He also did reaffirm he is committed to staying with Fox. He said 9 years, hopefully more. So
first reported by you, Ben.
That's right. Now, in fairness, that was Don Yee, not Tom Brady, but there's something to be said for getting it straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak. But I never doubted Don wasn't speaking for Tom. But yes, he's as much as anyone could predict anything 9 years out, he seems committed to it.
Ben, shifting gears a little bit, Goodell also brought up the potential of an NFL-backed flag football league. And obviously with the Olympics coming in 2028, there's some hype around flag. But do you see this as a legit media property?
That's a tough question. I mean, I think to answer that right now, no. I think the track record with the flag Pro Bowl is that it's a declining asset. I think the flag games that have been on TV to date have been very mediocre. Austin could tell us the exact numbers, but they're not the sorts of numbers that make anybody at the higher levels of major media companies look twice. That's going to change with the Olympics. Literally, things you didn't even know are sports get decent viewership if it's got the Olympic rings in the corner of the screen every 4 years on NBC. So that's going to be a boost. I have to imagine that as a revenue generating rights vehicle, an NFL flag league is a long-term developmental process. At best, I think the flag concept accomplishes a lot of strategic goals for the NFL in terms of making it more accessible to international markets and getting more women into the sport at particularly at high school and scholastic levels. And the existence of a pro league is virtuous in its own right. There can be you start to create this developmental hierarchy. There's somewhere for the 15-year-old girl who learns that she's really good at flag football to go. I think that's an important part of the system they're trying to build here. And if they make $1 out of it from a TV rights perspective, I think that's gravy to them at this point.
I mean, you referenced the TV numbers for flag football out there, and I'll just, I'll go to Mad Men and not great, Bob, not great. The numbers are not great. Look at the Pro Bowl this past Sunday, probably the least watched live Pro Bowl we've had yet. It's the third year of a flag game there. So how much interest is there going to be there in flag football? Yeah, I think that remains to be seen.
Maybe you guys can tell me differently, but I don't know. I mean, the NFL talks about how flag is, not tackle, but it still delivers a lot of the most exciting parts of the game. It's sort of a feeling they've got that is not so different. I think it's completely different on TV. Do you think it scratches a football itch to the extent either of you have watched flag football on TV?
I've watched some of the pro league stuff that they had on NFL Network, and I agree. It doesn't really scratch that itch. If I'm going to watch something that is not the NFL on the flag side, obviously college football, but yeah, I might watch the UFL, in the spring. That might be how I, scratch that football itch. And those numbers that we've seen evidence of the UFL, and we've seen what like some of these fringe flag leagues have been able to draw. And obviously, having the NFL IP attached to it is different. But I got to imagine the UFL is going to have a leg up on what the flag is going to be able to draw, at least initially.
Yeah, I can't say I've watched too much flag football on TV, but it's a fun property in person. I have a bunch
Yeah.
of friends in New York that play in a league every Saturday night.
But that's Ben's point. Participatory, great, really good idea. But yeah, I don't know if it's going to translate to something that's incredibly popular on TV.
I don't see it as a super valuable property. It's tier 2 at best.
Ben, Roger Goodell also commented on the fact that there's not going to be an international Super Bowl until a franchise exists abroad. And I found this really interesting. We, posed this question to a lot of conference attendees at our Dealmakers conference at the end of 2024, and a lot of them thought that an international Super Bowl was probably on the horizon. So it was interesting to hear Roger Goodell kind of say, not really coming in the near future. Do you think it's ever going to happen?
That's a really interesting question because taking Goodell at his word, if having a permanent franchise based in, say, London, that's by far the most likely place for this. So we'll simplify it and just say London. If having a permanent franchise there is a necessary precondition for a Super Bowl to be played there, that puts a London Super Bowl more in a decade side of the whiteboard rather than a year's type side of the whiteboard. So if that's really the case, then it's so far away, it's not even worth talking about. I mean, to be direct. I've heard some people here in the last couple of days since Goodell said that, who said, yeah, well, never say never. The thing that he'd have to get over there is that the real precedent would be breaking is having a Super Bowl in a city that didn't have an NFL team in it. Because the Super Bowl hosting duties is always sort of a plum goal of owners. And when he said that, he was about 10 feet away from Eagles owner Jeffrey Lurie and Saints owner Gail Benson. And, the Saints are a small market team that don't drive a lot of revenue in the ways that, the true business royalty elites of the league do. But one thing Gail Benson's got is a spot in the Super Bowl rotation. So no matter what the dollars say about London, if you went to London without a team based there, you're taking away a Super Bowl from the existing 32 owners. And that's a tough one. They would have to be convinced that it was really, really worth their while to do that. And I think that's where that came from. And at this point, we can probably stop talking about that for a few years. But again, never say never. If this international thing really takes off, then the people I've talked to say that from a business operational profitability standpoint, a London Super Bowl looks pretty good to them.
Well, we'll see what happens first, a Super Bowl abroad or a UEFA Champions League final here in the U.S. I think both of those are very interesting to watch on the media side.
Oh, I would love a UEFA Champions League over here. Ben, Goodell also hit on the possibility of the NFL opting out of its media rights deal that would come in 2029. I think the most obvious is Paramount, Skydance, and CBS with all the upheaval there. What chatter are you hearing around that?
And that could happen even sooner than 2029, right?
Goodell said he would not. I think the question was, would you say it's likely we're going to use the opt out? He said, I wouldn't say that, but then kind of used a couple hundred words to lead anyone to conclude that the answer is yes, it's likely we're going to exercise those opt outs. I'm not Roger Goodell. I don't report to the owner, so I can say it's difficult to imagine a scenario in which they would not exercise those. And in the case of the Paramount situation, exercise whatever contractual ability they've got to reopen those deals as soon as possible. I don't have to tell you that or the listeners to this podcast that these seemed like big numbers when the deals were done, but they look smaller and smaller with every passing day.
Yeah.
I mean, the NBA juxtaposition is flashing red around NFL owners who almost have like an emotional problem with being compared to the NBA. They believe their product is just so much better.
When you got NBC paying more for its NBA package than CBS is paying for its NFL package, yeah, NFL owners are probably having a what the hell moment.
Right. I mean, anytime the Sports Business Journal explicitly compares something about the NBA's audience and reach to the NFL's audience and fandom, I get a call or a text from Park Avenue saying it's not the same universe. We hit so many more people than any other sport does. So I'm extrapolating a little bit from that tenor of those conversations to this situation. And yeah, I mean, of course they're going to exercise that opt out. I can't imagine why they wouldn't. And this ties into the 18th game conversation too, because are you actually getting paid what the 18th game would be worth today and tomorrow, or are you getting what those 18th games are being valued as just a marginal increase in the current calendars?
Well, should that Paramount Skydance merger go through, and just based on this whole 60-minute shenanigans stuff that's going on, I got to imagine that's going toward the goal of getting done. Yeah, CBS, that deal, if it opens up for the NFL because of that merger, will give us the first look at what the NFL is looking at, what it might be trying to extract from its media partners. And, it's something you've written a lot about. There's also the whole NFL media sales situation still going on, and that might be involved with any sort of CBS, Skydance, Paramount, NFL sort of renegotiation.
And mentioning that concept of an equity swap as part of some sort of renegotiation, I think is important because as much as the NFL believes their rights are undervalued and they could get a lot more, um, Brian Rolap, the chief media and business officer of the NFL, said, I believe on stage at SBJ, a conference recently, that we want our rights holders to be strong too. They don't want to get a big number at the expense of a newly combined or recapitalized CBS Paramount's world. They don't want them to be hamstrung just to keep the league. So if there's any kind of countervailing force against the largest number you could possibly imagine, it's that.
No, I agree. I think the NFL has such a position of strength that they can do a rising tide for all boats here and really make their partners strong.
Ben, you already brought up the potential for an 18th game. Do you think there's another media package out there for the international games?
The commissioner said that was one possible outcome of a dramatically expanded international schedule. And I think we've talked about that for some time, even before they admitted that, a package of 8 Sunday morning Europe games might be appealing to somebody else, and it might be at a lower price point to get in a totally new player, which the league always wants to have at least one more bidder than there are packages long term strategically. And I'm not saying that wouldn't happen, but my sense of things is that they'd have quite a bit of demand from existing partners for that as well. I mean, it would seem to make a lot of sense if Netflix could be associated with the international series as an entity. I think it's too early in the game to say that one outcome is more likely than others. I think it's just a matter of guesswork who that brand new rights holder would be in this case. And at this point, my gut, based on kind of just knowing how Roger Goodell talks at these press conferences, he sort of said, yeah, that definitely could happen. But I got the impression he thought it was slightly more likely it would be an existing partner enhancing their relationship with the league, which naturally leads us to Netflix. But to be clear, I am several assumptions out on a tree limb at this point. So I don't really know.
Well, I know later in the podcast, we're going to be talking to the NFL's Hans Schroeder about the streaming strategy and some of the other properties that are coming up in the next couple of years, like the NFL draft. But one thing I wanted to ask you, Ben, another deal, a separate deal that ESPN has outside of their normal media rights package is to have that wild card game on a Monday night. A lot of people remember that used to be like buried on a Saturday afternoon every year, and ESPN separately negotiated to have that Monday night wildcard game with a Manning cast. How do you think that that's performed? Or do you think that maybe, they've had enough of it being on Monday night, we can live with that Saturday slot?
If somebody else asked me this question, the first thing I would do is text you to ask me for the numbers, how the Monday night wild card compares to the old third Saturday wild, or what that would be on a Saturday. I've got to imagine that generally speaking, Monday night's better than Saturday at 1 for one of these wild card
It
games.
is.
I don't see any reason they'd get away from it. I don't think teams love it. I don't think fans love it. I think they sense that it's a little unfair in a playoff situation, a do or die tournament, that a team has a short week. I think history has shown us that those sorts of football operations concerns don't go that far compared to the bottom line, that there's a better audience there. I guess I couldn't tell you what ESPN thinks of it, but that's one of those things that once it's been installed and we're used to it for a few years, it's probably never going away.
Well, Ben Fischer, our man on the ground in New Orleans, appreciate you popping into the podcast.
Happy to. Anytime.